The Set Free Radio Show. Truth music for East Texas.
We just want to talk about the newest book, Person of Interest. You can see it right there. We got
That's
it.
right.
Very awesome book, man. It's very dope. I'm very blessed that I was able to kind of read it.
You're the book launcher.
During,
That's right.
during the
awesome.
test run. So
Awesome.
it's been a very awesome book, man. It's very neat the way you approached it, even. And I guess the first question I have about the book is that because having read Cold Case Christianity before, it seems like Cold Case Christianity was focused on making the case for the most part, and that this kind of involves also your testimony too. So
and part of that is because for years people would ask me about that, and I was always hesitant to say much about. Because unfortunately, the truth is that my testimony is that crazy investigation that was in a cold case. Yeah. But no one ever thinks of that as a testimony. They think, well, no, but we want to know kind of like, what is your spiritual journey? What was it? Where did God bring you to? What experience? It's about basic experiences. People want to know, what was the experience that demonstrated it was true for you? Yeah. And I thought, well, it wasn't an experience. It was an investigation. And I don't know how else to say it. But what I tried to do in Person of Interest was kind of show you how this unwrapped, and so that was part of what I'm doing. But also, I'm trying to make an out. So there's two forms of evidence you use when you do criminal trials. And when I was doing cold case, I was looking at everything that was inside the New Testament. Why do we trust that New Testament is reliable? But anytime you have a crime scene, you're not just working with the evidence in the crime scene, you're often working with evidence that's outside the crime scene. Some domino that got tripped over that ends up tripping a domino out over there. Well, I'm going to look at all that stuff when I make the case. So Person of Interest takes a kind of an opposite view of cold case. Cold case looks at what's in the Gospels. Person of Interest looks at what's outside the Gospels. And that case, the inside and outside case, is really what compelled me to believe this was true. Yeah. And it's a long process, right? Because to build that case, even if you work at it every day, it's going to take months just to get to a place where you feel like you have what I always call like a blogger's ability to recall it, to communicate it. Now, this is not like an academic's ability to communicate it, but when you're really trying to convince yourself, or convince yourself it isn't true, just trying to either bring it in or take it off the list, you just need to know, you'll know pretty quickly. I don't need to have necessarily an academic's view to have enough information to make a decision. And so what we do with Person of Interest is I have a strategy. I use all the same strategy in every no-body murder case where someone kills their business partner or they kill their loved one, and then they get rid of the body and they say, I don't know what happened to her. She just got mad, she had an argument and she left. And then 30 years goes by and we don't have any photographs from a crime scene because it was never even taken as a murder. Initially it was a missing persons. And even if you got wise to it in the first month, well, you're a month behind the murder scene. And so now you have this mess. And so without anything in the crime scene, how do you determine what happened on the day that she went missing? I always say, well, if she was murdered, that was an explosive event, but all bombs have a fuse that burn up to the detonation of the bomb, and then you have all this blast radius junk everywhere. And so we're going to make the case from the fuse and the fallout. I'll tell, even if I have nothing from the crime scene, I can make a case from the fuse and the fallout. And that's what we do in Person of Interest. What we're trying to do is say, hey, if they had utterly destroyed every New Testament document, well, it turns out you're not going to get rid of Jesus because you can completely reconstruct the Jesus story just from the fuse and fallout of history. And then you got to ask yourself the question, and that, by the way, cannot be done for any other historical figure. So the question becomes then why? Why does this guy have that kind of impact? And then from that impact, you can completely reconstruct his story. That's like crazy. Why would that be the case? So that's really what the book tries to do.
Yes, it's a very awesome way to look at it, and even the way you tied in the case,
I tried to retell a murder, and I'll tell you something about that. I learned something. So when I did Cold Case, I would tell a little detective story in every chapter, but they weren't related. They were just little, 2-paragraph, 3-paragraph stories. And I thought that just kind of helps people to see, that's how it works in a case. Here's how it works with Jesus. But this time, I learned something from doing kids' books, because I did 3 kids' books. I learned something from those kids' books that was interesting. Kids would tell me that, I wanted to read it right away. I wanted to read the whole thing. Well, that's because in the kids' books, I'd have a mystery.
You want the whole,
And it would be over 10 chapters.
Yep.
And you'd have to go through each chapter to solve the mystery. And so even though they probably weren't even interested in the case for Jesus, they wanted to see what was in that box, or where'd that dog come from, whatever mystery I put in there.
Yeah.
So in this book, I just decided to tell a story of one case over 10 chapters.
Yes.
And so I think the next book I might do something very similar because I think that ended up being popular.
Oh yeah, and then like you said, you're learning about Jesus, but you're also at the same
you
time
want to see how did he convict us? Yeah.
So that's a very cool thing. Would you call this maybe a prequel to Cold Case Christianity?
Yeah. So people ask me, well, how did you become a? Well, it's actually captured in 3 books. Mm-hmm. It's Cold Case Christianity, and that got me to a place where I had to rethink my presuppositions about God's existence. So then I started thinking, well, okay, but this would require God. This would require something divine, and I reject that. Yeah. And why am I rejecting that? So I found myself then looking at the evidence that I wrote in another book called God's Crime Scene. Yes. So really, for me, that 9-month period was God's crime scene, Cold Case Christianity, and Person of Interest, all in one 9-month period. Yeah. And when I first started writing books, I would offer the publishers, which of these do you want to go? The first publishers said, well, we'll start with Cold Case. Mm-hmm. But if you think about it, if there's no God, then there's no Christian God. Yeah. So if you looked at it sequentially, you'd probably start with the case for God rather than the case for the gospel or liability. But for me, it was it was not as clean as that. When you start looking at Christianity, you probably felt the same way. You start having questions, and they're in weird niches. Mm-hmm. And then you need an answer to that weird niche question before you can go on. Yeah. But you might think, well, why do you need that? This isn't even related. It's something over here. Well, yeah, but it's just the way your mind thinks. So you end up, I rabbit trailed a bunch of stuff, right? It wasn't a clean, like, oh, I'm going to knock over this, then I'm going to knock over that. No, I'd get 2 steps in, and I'd go, oh, rabbit, come back. Oh, rabbit, come back. So I kind of like the squirrel on Up, that movie where the dog is constantly squirrel. That's how you kind of feel when you do this work.
Yes, and I agree with you.
And you got to chase those rabbits until you run them out.
Yeah, so. And there's a bunch on the chase.
Yeah, that's true.
Yes, and so like person interest, it basically, I remember reading the interview or hearing an interview, you were saying that a large part of the reason why it was wrote was because of the COVID lockdown.
I had no idea how much work it was going to be to make what is my blogger's ability. So I'd already looked at all this stuff years ago, and I had some notes, and I had some, but I didn't keep everything I should have, and I didn't know I'd be writing a book about it 24 years later. So I didn't keep it all, and then a lot of stuff kind of got updated. So I want to make sure I have updated stuff. So to turn kind of a blogger level understanding of certain topics into a referenced, footnoted.
Bunch of references.
I needed somehow. I got 2. I had 2 research assistants, and I could tell them, okay, here's where I got it from before. Just go back. I need it to be now footnoted though, so I need to find out. I think it's going to be over here, and they helped me to find my sources again and footnote all those sources, and that was really helpful because it turns out that there's about 50 pages of footnotes in this book. Printed version.
Yes.
And I think that's, if people want to read that, great, but you don't have to read that to get the book to work. But then there's another 270 in a PDF file offline because I just knew that I wanted to empty it out. If you thought, well, how? Because we're doing some crazy stuff in this book. One of the things we're doing, for example, is seeing the impact of Jesus of Nazareth on scientists. Yes. Well, we have 950 scientists we looked at as a group, and then you're reading through all of their statements about Jesus, their work. Well, that's a lot of data, and I'm not going to put that in the book. It'll bore you to tears. I want to be able to summarize it in the book. Look at it this way. When you do a criminal trial in front of a jury, you present data, facts, for like 10 weeks, and then you're done. You do a 4-hour closing argument. Well, you're not presenting the whole 10 weeks worth of stuff again. You're summarizing it into 4 hours. So a book sometimes is like your closing argument, but it stands on 10 weeks worth of evidence you showed the jury. Well, where's that evidence? It's in the footnotes. Yeah. So that's what we had to do for this book. And if it hadn't been for COVID, I can tell you I would not have had the time. Yeah. Like I wasn't traveling. They canceled all the travel events. So I was home, and I was able to every day just get up and sit in the living room in front of a fire and bang out the resources. So it's pretty cool.
And it just, I think, kind of speaks to just even as bad as COVID was and everything that happened, God works good out of everything.
Yeah, so. And I think that and we kind of get a sense of, like you even said in your own personal story, that sometimes it's dark spots in your journey
Yeah.
that end up pointing you. You don't sometimes look up until you're standing at the bottom. So
Exactly. Gotta get knocked off the horse like Paul, you know?
that's right. That's exactly right.
Exactly. Well, let me see. Let me ask what was the most surprising thing you found in your research?
I thought always the science. That's why I did a whole chapter on science, because when I was first looking at this 20 some odd years ago, I was the guy who would have said that these Christians are anti-science and they're anti-education. So those two chapters, education and science, in the book, I just thought that was the most surprising thing. I guess, I went to UCLA, and by the time I was at UCLA, it was not a Christian-friendly campus. It wasn't even a conservative-friendly campus, and so I was surprised to find how much of like the UC system. You'd be surprised to see how many university systems in America and globally were founded by Christ followers, even though today they would reject Jesus. So that's part of what I want to write about too.
That's good. Yeah, and I think one of the things that kind of, because one thing that kind of tripped me up, or was tripping me up earlier on, because I remember reading Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, because sometimes I guess the whole zeitgeist.
Spirit of the age.
And they get to talk about, well, there's all these different deities.
The movie. Oh, absolutely.
And so I think that's one of the things that kind of troubled me. But even C.S. Lewis said that kind of something you touched on, that the fact that all these, that any similarities there were kind of points to Jesus. You know what I'm saying? Rather than
why would they be similar? That's one of the things we're going to talk about tonight at the presentation we're doing here. So I think that is, and that never bothered me, right? Well, a lot of it was because as you examine the similarities, they're not that similar. So there's some things you're thinking, to be honest, I would have hoped they were more similar, because I wanted to. That would be intriguing, right? How could that be? Either you discover something false about Jesus, or something false about the other God. You discover something, though.
Yeah.
But it turns out, as you examine these, they are not as similar as they would have you believe.
Exactly.
But there are some overarching similarities that we need to talk about, and ask the question, why are these similar in all of these ancient mythologies? So anyway,
and then I think that speaks also to like the strenuous research and footnotes and myths, because you have the evidence to a lot of stuff like the zeitgeist and a lot of memes.
There was another movie called The God Who Wasn't There.
Really, okay.
Kind of a similar one too. This idea that there are other dying and rising saviors. There are other saviors that are born of virgins, all these things that are just borrowed allegedly by the gospel authors.
They don't have any first source.
Yeah, I know. So, but if you really go back, and the one that got me the most interested was Mithras, a deity from Persia, and because sometimes this would be like they make him sound so similar to Jesus, and then as you research it, you realize, wow, this is kind of like all mythologies. You have to really stretch the Mithras story to get him to look like Jesus in any way.
And that's, I think that's the importance of like researching everything for yourself, because there's so much information on the internet. You don't want to just take anything for what it says. You want to go out there and research it, look at both sides, the Christian side and the secular side.
I do think we're at a crisis right now of trust. Like if young people thought about, they want to know something about Jesus, I don't know, who would they trust online? You almost feel like you can get polar opposite explanations for any issue, politically, religiously, whatever, depending on which news source you go to.
Yeah, that's true.
So then the question becomes, and both seem equally authoritative, so how do you know which of these to trust, right? And you can't trust my pastor. He's got skin in the game. He wants me to be a Christian. He wants me to tithe to his church. Whatever it may be. I've heard them all. So that is part of the challenge, is how do you, but rest assured, even in a criminal trial, in a criminal case, there is a fact set available. And it's true, the way I present it may be different than the way the defense attorney presents the exact same data. But the jury can return to the data. So what we have to be able to help people do is to return. That's why you put footnotes, case notes in a book.
Exactly. Yeah, and like I said, I would highly suggest, if you haven't checked the book out, man, it's awesome. It's available everywhere you can get a book at, and like I said, on top of that, you get that book with the footnotes, all the drawings that you hand drew yourself.
I gotta see if it's at Books A Million. I hope it's there. Since we're here,
Yeah,
there's no Books A Million where I'm at, by the way. This is the only one I've ever known, because it's the only one I've ever been to in Longview.
Gotcha. Yeah, so, I went up there to try to get my flyer for the event. And the manager wasn't there, so I left it. But
that's
funny. Like, he mentioned it.
I mentioned his business for crying out loud.
I gave him a shout out and everything.
All right, that's okay.
So definitely check it out. Not only do you get the book, you get the footnotes, you get the PDF,
And I've got PowerPoints,
yes,
videos, all that stuff comes with it.
It's a very awesome book. So we're gonna take a quick little break right there. We're gonna play some more music, and then we're gonna come back and wrap this thing up. And we will be right back. Don't go anywhere. Stay tuned.
The Set Free Radio Show. Truth music for East Texas.